good afternoon, good morning, good evening, from whichever part of the world you're dialing in. I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of ioki and NextBillion to today's Spatial Insider webinar, where we will be focusing and discussing the topic of mastering hyperlocal route optimization techniques in the context of demand-responsive transport services. My name is Armin Fendrich. I'm the head of the EMEA region at NextBillion.ai, an industry-leading spatial data and AI platform that helps enterprises build, scale, and manage their own mapping ecosystem. I'm happy to be your host today. But more importantly, our special guest today is Christian Bäuerlein. Christian is the CTO at ioki, a subsidiary of Deutsche Bahn and a leading provider of innovative transportation solutions. Christian will be sharing his insights and expertise on how route optimization can be used to improve the efficiency of DRT services. We will be discussing the challenges that companies in this industry face and how route optimization can help to overcome them. You will learn how route optimization can be used to reduce cost, improve customer satisfaction, and increase the overall efficiency of these services. We're excited to have Christian join us today, and we look forward to hearing his perspective on this important topic. We'll take questions towards the end of the session, so please post your question in the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting, and we'll answer them at the end. We hope that you will come away with this webinar with a better understanding of the role of route optimization as it relates to DRT and how it can be used to improve the overall performance of these services. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to an engaging and informative session. And over to you, Christian. Please introduce yourself to the audience and also tell us a bit about ioki's business in general.
Hi. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So ioki is a rather young company. I think it's about 5 years old, and it's a full subsidiary of Deutsche Bahn, the German railway company. So we're headquartered in Frankfurt, and we're a software as a service company that offers digital mobility solutions. So the special thing about us is we're not a B2C company. We don't operate our own services. Our customers, which are local public transport providers, they want to extend their service portfolio with an on-demand service, and that's what they can do with us. So they usually run like buses and trains and subways, and when they want to extend this, for example, with an on-demand platform, we deliver the technology stack. So we basically plug and play, provide mobile apps for the passengers, for the drivers, business intelligence solutions, and of course the fleet optimization backend for this on-demand service. And yeah, we offer this as a white label product, so you won't see us often or only on the second side. But our technology already operates over 50 regions in Central Europe for these public transport providers. Yeah, we do this with classic driver-based operations, but also with a growing number of services which actually utilize self-driving vehicles.
We'll get back to that later on, I think. So thanks for that. And what's your specific role as a CTO? Kind of, what are you focusing on?
I am basically responsible for the technical branch of the company. I've been there since the very beginning. I've saw the first lines of code being written, and I'm also coming from the backend side. And yeah, I love building web platforms, love working with geospatial data, and that's what I can do at ioki.
Wonderful. So digging into the topic a bit more. So if you look at what are the typical challenges in a DRT sort of service which you come across on a let's say regular basis with all these deployments you have, and maybe to what extent they may differ, right, from region to region.
Yeah, I think we have a interesting use case here with ioki, because it's important to understand that we are, as ioki, we are not running our own services. So we are extending the portfolio of the local transport providers, and they are utilizing our platform to run on-demand services. So the challenge here is that, of course, the goal of a public transport provider is not only to have a good running on-demand service, they want to have a good running overall public transport portfolio. So the challenge here is not only that our service has to run well, it also has to operate in a way that it creates synergies with and creates an overall better public transport. And yeah, since we are part of public transport, there are actually often some use cases that are very special to us. So our fleets, they're not running like huge buses. It's mostly like shuttles and vans about this size. But since we are part of the public infrastructure, there are, for example, often some special traffic rules that just apply to us. So if you, for example, take something like a pedestrian area or a special road or a bridge, which is like closed for normal cars, and it's also closed for normal buses, but we are allowed to use it in this very special area. We have an exceptional allowance, just because we are part like of the public infrastructure. And often this is done because these are like very, very useful shortcuts, especially when we are talking about like travel times of like 10 to 15 minutes. And on the other side, we have to somehow make use of these in our system, because usual car profiles in routing service won't work because they are not allowed to go there. And if there would be any like out of the bus profiles, they also wouldn't work because they're not allowed to go there. It's just our special shuttle fleets in some cases that get this exception. So yeah, and for these cases, we need to be able to customize the routing to make like use of this special goodness, these allowances, because often they are like very critical points that make a huge impact on our ETAs in this area. Like this one pedestrian area, if you're allowed to drive through, you can like save 10 minutes. And if you have like an average travel time from 10 to 15 minutes, of course, this is a lot.
Right. Given you are a SaaS provider, right? And you have deployments in 50 plus regions. I mean, when you're a SaaS company, there's always a question of scale and efficiencies, right? Would you say that, let's say, these requirements in these different regions are very similar, or would you say they are unique by region or by city or whatever measure you take?
Yeah, they're actually often very unique, at least by use case. So in our case, since we don't run these services and we don't decide where they get used, it's not like a lot of other ride-hailing services which concentrate basically on downtown and expand from going there. Sometimes we are downtown, sometimes we are in suburban areas, sometimes on the countryside. It really depends where there is the most need for public transport, depending on the local provider. So if you combine this with individual concessions that come with running a public transport service, this creates on the one hand, a certain set of rules, because this concession might allow you to do some things like crossing a bridge, others can't. It might also disallow some things, or enforce things being done in a certain way, in which side of street you have to stop, where you are allowed to stop. There are a lot of different requirements coming to this. And so this means in the end, we have to be flexible, because we have to adjust to these local circumstances. And yeah, we need to be able to adapt our platform to the needs of each of these individual services. And so it was built from, sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say we knew this was coming. I mean, we are like being born out of public transport, right? Being like a subsidiary of Deutsche Bahn. So we knew this was coming, and it was planned like this from the beginning. And we also need it. It's really a very important part of our feature set that we are able to adapt.
So the platform has to be very flexible to really deploy custom deployments for each of the operators you're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
Looking at these operators who are your customers, what would be sort of typical KPIs, and what role does, because you're a geospatial expert, what role does geospatial data play in that context?
Of course, we need to be on time, or we want to utilize the fleets that we have as good as possible. We want to do ride pooling if it's possible. But as I said, it really depends on the very specific situation of each area. So, for example, if you are downtown in the city at noon, you probably have a different understanding of a quality of service than if you are on the countryside at midnight. Right. Because at noon downtown, everything that takes longer than 5 minutes to arrive is no good service anymore. While when you are somewhere on the countryside at midnight, you're just happy to get away, even if you have to wait like 30 minutes. And yeah, since we have very diverse areas where we use our platform, it's really important to have a different set of, or to be able to be flexible in defining this quality of service. And we do this. And of course, we also use geospatial data and mapping platforms and APIs to then calculate how we utilize the fleet based on these individual parameters.
So it sounds like ETAs are very important, but I think that the additional complexity is that expected ETAs depend on the time of day even, right? Of when the service is being called.
Yeah, it really depends also what the individual customer wants to achieve with using our service. So some want to just have a cool on-demand service. Some others want to compensate for example, less service at night when there are less other offerings in public transport. So it really depends. And in our case, ETAs are super important. I mean, on one hand, of course, for the single customer, but also for the overall service, because in our case, it's not like we have a two-sided marketplace or something like this. In the end, we have a fleet that at hand that can operate, and we do a fleet optimization with this limited numbers of shuttles on duty. So, and our goal is to serve it as efficient as possible. And since we are not only providing ad hoc bookings, but also guaranteed pre-booking of rides, this means it's even more important because each of this shuttles, it basically has a schedule. And when the ETAs are off too much, we don't have only a problem with the current customer. We might get a problem with the whole shift and every passenger that follows after.
You mentioned two-side marketplaces, i.e., I think Uber, Bolt, maybe Freeno, more traditional, let's say, ride-hailing. Do your operators view them as competitors or pretty much ignore them, if I may say so?
We don't ignore them because I think we're somehow in the same niche, use sometimes maybe even the same technology. But our goal is actually different because our goal is always about being integrated into the public transport. And we also don't decide, we don't operate our services ourselves. So we are just a technology provider for the public transport portfolio, while most of these other companies, they operate on their own, and they are rather building a parallel transportation system next to public transport, while our goal is integrating into the existing one.
Right. Early on, you mentioned self-driving cars and vehicles. So what's your view on the impact on your platform, the business, your operators? If we kind of look ahead a few years, I think you made a public announcement last year about autonomous also, and maybe just elaborate a bit on your view on that.
Yeah, I mean, it has always been part of ioki to work on this as well. I mean, on one hand, you have on-demand platforms. On the other hand, you have self-driving cars, and if this would work together, it would be great, right? I mean, it's two technologies who just make sense working together. And on one hand, we have the technology, and I mean, it's interesting since we are already integrating self-driving cars in the public transport context, and this is, for example, it comes with very special routing requirements, because right now, every single street, for example, in Germany, where one of these cars can drive, has to be allowed by the authorities. There are other like speed restrictions and all this kind of stuff. So you need like very specific routing profiles if you want to work with this. And of course, if you look at this from a public transport perspective, there are also a lot of other challenges. For example, how do passengers check in? How do they check out? How do you control a ticket? Or how do you make sure people don't miss their stop? What if somebody gets unconscious or whatnot? So it's more complicated than privately owned autonomous vehicles.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, from a business point of view, self-driving cars are coming. They are also already running on our platform. I mean, they're not like coming super fast, these technologies, but step by step. And from a business perspective, this is also what we adjust for. So we are working towards like sustainable evolution, because there will be no revolution. I mean, in 5 years, people won't throw away 10,000 cars and buy 10,000 new ones. This, especially in the public transport context, nobody can pay this. And this is always super important if you are looking at these projections when it is about self-driving cars. So what we do is we're trying to prepare our technologies in our platform for a hybrid mode, because these cars are expensive, and there will be like mixed fleets for some times. Otherwise, nobody can pay for this. And this is how we expect this change will happen, step by step. And we are preparing our technology to grow with this.
Yeah, and in that context, I think if we go a few years back, when the predictions were all that by 2020 already we're going to be all autonomous, right, and autonomous taxis, I think, and the Ubers of the world, I think their main motivation or driver for that change is to eliminate the cost of the driver, right? From a, let's say, more public transit extension point of view, what would be the motivation for an operator to actually go autonomous with your technology?
I mean, it depends. Of course, the cost of the driver is a factor. But there are also other topics where people just start to realize that, for example, drivers in the public transport context, they don't just drive the car, right? I mean, would you put like, I don't know, 6-10-year-old kids into a car without an adult? Just in a self-driving car? What is if something happens to the people inside or outside? So it's not that easy in the public transport context, because there are a lot of different roles that somehow have to be covered. And there are technologies that are researched and built to take over some of these roles. But how all of this will work in combination, and if this really just takes away the need for a person who knows its way in and out of this kind of transportation, I'm personally not sure about this.
Right. So like things like safety, security, convenience are probably more relevant and important to these operators than just the pure fact that the car eventually can drive on its own, right?
Yeah, I think it will really depend, again, like on the situation. I mean, is it an area where it is easy to drive, or is it something that needs a lot of intervention because maybe it's downtown, it's very complicated to drive even for an autonomous car? And but I think we will find out.
We'll find out in a few years. Yeah. Going back again, digging a bit deeper now on some of, let's say, the typical problems you're facing on a daily basis. What's the importance of, let's say, location data address data in the context of a typical operation which runs on your technology?
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, it's the other part. So we just talked about how do you get from A to B? And the other question is, what is A and what is B when you do transportation for people? And yeah, since we are in this field, I mean, for us, it's always, this is the other important factor, that we are able to find pickup and drop-off points which are approachable for passengers, but also approachable for vehicles. And all this while minimizing the detours of the vehicle and also the overhead of finding each other.
So yeah, so it's a more complex problem to, I would say, move people than moving parcels and pizza, right?
Yeah, because people move.
People move, and it's a two-dimensional. There's one dimension more in the problem statement, right?
Yeah, I mean, it gives you also more flexibility for optimization, because you can also let the passenger walk a little bit towards the car, optimizing the route this way. But of course, it's still tricky. Also in the public transport context again, because of course, a lot of our pickup stations, for example, are pieces of infrastructure by public transport. So a good example is like a suburban train station in Germany. These are usually covering huge areas. For example, due to accessibility reasons, you'd have to take long, non-direct walks from the train to, for example, a parking lot. And there are only a few points where a pickup can take place, because these stations are also often in combination with tunnels or stuff like this. So it's always a tricky situation to really make a point or find a pickup point or a drop-off point that is convenient for the driver, but also for the passenger.
So how much, again, from a more technical platform point of view, how much work does that require on your side in terms of ingesting third-party data or manual intervention?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we need and we use a good geocoder and a good routing service. And we also have our own solutions on top of this. For example, for station-based services, that we have like different mechanisms to snap passengers to certain stations. So because we know that then it will take place in an optimized way. And we are able to we have like optimizing mechanisms to either optimize the route for the passengers or for the vehicle, or find a good compromise. But in the end, this is also like something special, as I said, because we are able to, for example, if you compare it to delivery services, we are able to move both parties a bit. We have a little bit more flexibility. And yeah, but of course, in the end, this is like very local optimization, because when you want to do it like very good, you often need manual editing to really optimize these things for certain, for example, like points of interest, because you need local knowledge if you want to get it right.
Right, and then typically the local knowledge then comes from, I guess, the operator themselves,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm watching the time a bit here. So, if there would be one wish you could sort of articulate in terms of a problem you want to have solved, what would that be? Your master problem.
Yeah. The hill I will die on. No, I mean, there are a lot of challenges we talked about. So usually like more reliant traffic estimation or more customizable routing services are always nice, but there are also still some things which are like super hard to digitize when it comes to routing services. So I'm giving an example of a hard problem, just to know that what I'm talking about. Let's talk about ferries. So on the countryside in Germany, especially in northern Germany, there are often ferries crossing a river just to connect two sides of a river. And the small ferries, they operate without a fixed schedule. It's just a little ferry that goes back and forth, and it waits for some cars, then it crosses the river again.
And you hail the ferry in the old way, right?
All day long. There's no plan behind this. This is like a real on-demand ferry, right? So we are somehow in the same niche. But in the end, if you want to calculate a route, and we're talking about like 10, 15-minute routes on average, and you have this ferry, it's basically like a traffic light that if you're unlucky, it's red for 20 minutes.
Right.
So it can put you off a lot. And I think it's just an interesting problem. Of course, you can do like educated guesstimations how this works, but in the end, it's a real world operated piece of infrastructure, and you just have to guesstimate. It's super hard to get this right, but still, this is how the world works, and I think this is what is interesting about geospatial problems. So if somebody could like magically do something about it, I would be very happy.
Okay, we'll try. I guess we're getting towards the end, and we're getting a few questions here. Christian, I'm guessing you seeing them also, right, on the Q&A panel?
Yes, I do.
The first one actually, I think, is for you.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the second one too.
So I read it out loud in case somebody didn't find the panel. So the question was, can you share some insights into ioki's experience with integrating demand-responsive mobility services into existing public transportation systems? Yes, I can. And I do. So I think it really depends on what kind of integration you're interested in. So on one hand, of course, we have like our own service that transports people, and there are other services that transport people. And maybe you want to connect these services with your classic like multimodal or intermodal calculations. And this on its own is very, very tricky, especially because all of these services, because you try to connect two different ways of organizing mobility. On one hand, scheduled mobility, like a train line. On the other hand, on-demand mobility. And the whole point of this is that it doesn't have a schedule. So this is tricky on its own if you want to combine it. But of course, to be really integrated into public transport, it takes a lot more. So for example, you probably want to use your monthly pass of your local transport provider to run with our services. You maybe want to use the same app. So this tariff system integration, which is super important to be like really integrated into this, so people perceive it as a whole and as a whole service offering, not as a single, two different single services. And in the end, integrating into demand into a public transport system also means that you have another level and another standard, for example, for accessibility. Accessibility not only on software, but also on stuff like how do I pay things? How do I book rides? Do I need a credit card or do I have a right as a customer to be able to book this without a credit card because it's public transport? So this is also a whole field but it makes sense and it's an important part of being integrated into public transport, that this means you try to be part of public infrastructure. This means it should work for everyone.
But presumably you have done such integrations, right?
We do, yeah.
Okay.
For example, in Hamburg, we are fully integrated it's one of our biggest services, and we are fully integrated into the tariff system. You can book or buy a ticket that is valid for Hamburg in our app, and you can you get like a discount if you have other app tickets bought in Hamburg if you use it there. And of course, also the accessibility question have like a very high priority always when it's about public transport.
Right, and you can, if you start a journey with ioki, you can actually continue the journey then on the train or the bus eventually, on the bus line, or just let's say the fixed scheduled service.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this always depends on the service and what the current need and state of the customer is. but for many of them, it's a goal, and it also works already for some of them.
Okay, cool. Maybe the second question also, you want to take that one also?
Yeah. In today's world, what makes mobility analytics a very interesting and important branch of big data analytics? Yeah, I think the field of mobility analytics is still rather young. I mean, especially when it comes to public transport. Digitizing public transport is an ongoing effort. So, of course, also there is more digital data to work with since a couple of years. And this means we now, since, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, we are able to have much more data in the mobility field, and we are able to learn much more about it. We do this also at ioki. We have a mobility analytics consulting team, because a lot of these real-world operations are by first-time customers. I mean, they are running trains and subways, but they probably never ran an on-demand service before. And in our days, this is one of many different ways to get around. I mean, the field of mobility not only generates much more data because it's digitized now, it got also much more diverse. I mean, think about, like, there is not just a bike and a car and a bus. Now there are like e-scooters and very specific bikes by delivery services, custom built. You have electric vehicles. So all of these probably have a lot of room for optimization. 2 or 3 routing profiles just don't cut it anymore. And this is a good chance for big data analytics to learn this and to optimize this.
Wonderful. If there aren't any more questions, I would give you big thank you to Christian for sharing all these insights. And given that the world keeps changing, I think anyone in the geospatial area is going to continue to be busy, I guess, and further enhance these services. Thanks everyone who has joined this webinar today, and looking forward to some follow-up engagements as we move forward. Thanks, Christian.
Yeah, thank you, Armin. This was fun. And I hope I answered the questions correctly. If not, just hit me up on LinkedIn or whatever, and we can talk.
Good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.